edition of Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi, and this is podcast episode number 1090. And boy, do we have a good show for you. Dr. Shawn Andrews, the author of The Power of Perception, is our guest. Why is her book unique? It's the first book that addresses the global leadership gender gap by examining multiple barriers for advancement, along with gender culture, emotional intelligence, diversity, and inclusion, and different generations. It's also the first book to provide actionable and practical strategies for each topic and integrate multiple constructs into one unifying theme. That theme, the power of perception. Shawn, I've been excited to have you on the show since we met all those weeks ago. Welcome to the radio show.
Thank you, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, let's get started very simply. Tell us a little bit about, you refer to the perception as a powerful form of reality. So perception is a powerful form of reality, but how does this show up in the workplace, perception?
Well, it shows up all over the workplace,
Okay.
actually. When I did my dissertation research on this about 8 years ago, I realized that it comes down to perception, and it's all about perceptions of actually men and women in the workplace. But for women in particular, it impacts promotion and career advancement. And so it has nothing to do with skills and competencies of women as workers, as leaders, but it's the perceptions of women in the workplace. And so
I'm going to ask you for an example of a perception so that we can make it tangible for our audience.
Absolutely. Well, I was hoping you would, so thank you. So I'll give an example. So when we as a society, when we think of a leader, I often ask audiences, what do you think of? What comes to mind? I often hear competitive, aggressive, assertive, confident, decisive, maybe can, handle stress, take risks. Those are the types of descriptors I typically hear.
Okay.
We don't hear interpersonal relationships. We don't hear empathy. We don't hear collaboration, teamwork oftentimes. So this is what this is called, is agenic leader behavior. So when we think of a leader,
yes,
we think in male terms. We don't think in female terms, and men and women do this.
Okay.
And so it's a type of bias that's ingrained in us. And so when we think of historical leaders, we hear those typical descriptors, but we're not thinking about some of the skills and strengths that women have and bring to the table. And so that's one type of perception that actually shows up. It's pervasive. It shows up everywhere.
Is that a U.S. phenomenon? Is that a North American phenomenon? Is that a global thing? What are you finding in your research?
It is global, and
boy.
it is across multiple industries.
Okay.
So it's not, and it's not industry specific, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
So technology or whatever might be the current whipping person industry for this, it's not just that. Your research says it's much more pervasive than that.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, and when you're thinking of just a generic leader, but perceptions even filter down more than that. So when we think of, for example, I studied emotional intelligence, as you mentioned.
Yes.
And I looked at how the perceptions of our EQ strengths comes across in the workplace. And so I'll just give you a quick example, if you'd like.
I'd love it.
So we perceive men, we tend to perceive men as leaders, and we tend to perceive women more as supporters. We don't, perceive women as leaders right off the bat. And so as I alluded to earlier, but when I interviewed women, and in my research, and women who are naturally stronger in what you'd consider the male specific emotional intelligence competencies. So confidence, assertiveness, stress tolerance, are the male-specific, and then the female-specific EQ competencies are empathy, interpersonal relationships, and social responsibility. So that's how we tend to fall out from a gender-specific pattern.
Okay.
So having said that, I heard women shared stories with me. So if a woman was naturally, let's say, confident, assertive woman, naturally, and she displayed that at work all the time, she heard things like, tone down your assertiveness, be more of a team player, be more collaborative.
Wow. So actually the opposite of what the image of a leader was.
Exactly.
Wow.
But what's interesting about that, Rick, is if you look at the flip side of the coin, women who are actually higher in the female-specific EQ competencies. So let's say they were a naturally empathetic woman and leader. They were perceived as lacking substance and intelligence.
You can't win.
You can't win. That's exactly it.
Damn.
And that's exactly the sentiment that I heard over and over, is that it's a difficult position, because whether women were stronger than the male or the female, they still were met with perceptions that impacted their promotion.
So one of the things that caught my eye in your book and in prepping for this is that we talked about it's a global thing, but you also said it's an industry-wide thing and somewhat an age thing. And I was of the opinion that maybe as younger generations come into the workforce, some of these held beliefs would become, these perceptions, less of a reality. Is your research suggesting that trend exists, or is that just hopeful thinking on my part?
As we age?
No, as we bring in the younger cohorts.
Oh, gotcha. No, it is. It's actually both.
Okay.
To answer your question.
Oh boy.
It is wishful thinking.
Okay.
But we do see trends towards that.
Okay. But
so you're right. You're on the right track.
Okay.
So in looking, and I actually have a chapter dedicated in the book to millennials,
Right.
and actually Generation Z. Their younger cohorts coming up behind them.
Uh-huh.
And what I looked at is that we actually millennials actually have more in common with women historically. So I'll give you an example. Millennials really value flexibility in the workplace, more so than the boomers and Gen Xers did. They value the work-life balance. They're searching for meaning and purpose in their jobs now. They just don't want to come in, work 8 to 5, clock in, clock out like their parents or grandparents did.
Right. They've seen that play.
They've seen it.
And they know how it ends up. And they're like, homie, don't play that tune.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Bless their souls.
Exactly. And I think that's actually a very positive sign.
I'm agreeing with you.
And for workplaces to remain competitive, they're going to have to adapt.
Right.
Because the millennials are now the largest living generation. They've surpassed the boomers in sheer numbers. So we have to pay attention to this. And it's an important development. And the Gen Z behind them have many of the same characteristics as millennials. And they're projected to be even bigger.
Wow.
So this is a significant global trend.
Yes.
That's occurring at work. And I think it's very positive, because not only are organizations going to have to adapt, but it's better for women as well, because women value many of the same things that millennials do, which is the flexibility, the work-life balance, the meaning, the purpose.
So we have an enlightened audience here of CEOs and business owners around the world that listen to Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. And sometimes when we talk about some of these issues that you and I are touching on, people might think this is a bias or you have an axe to grind or something, but this is your dissertation, yes? This is a heavily researched, for those of you on Facebook Live or YouTube watching it later, this is not, a thin book here. So what we're talking about is not your author's bias that you wrote a book to confirm, your research that you're writing about the power of perception.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm really glad. But yes, so this is a 300-page book. Unfortunately, it's not an afternoon beach read.
Right.
It's going to take you a little longer, maybe a few trips to the beach. But it's based on my own dissertation research, but also the research of many, many others on the topics of leadership, EQ, gender, diversity. And it's
research thinking and investigation into these fields. You've been able to bring it together, and so why did you title it "The Power of Perception"?
So I titled it that because when I researched this and I looked at all the data and did the tabulations and all that, what I saw falling out, it was patterns and trends, and that it all came down to perception. And as I mentioned earlier, it has nothing to do with skills or competencies of individuals,
right?
And particularly of women, but it's perceptions. It's our perceptions of women as leaders. It's our perceptions of women as workers, as mothers, and as wives. And it all spills over into the workplace.
Interesting.
And those perceptions are powerful. And so that actually, when I looked at all of it and really analyzed, the data, that's what I saw.
Excellent.
It's about perception. And a lot of things underlie that perception, but that's what it comes down to.
So we're going to take a very short break here on Critical Mass Radio Show and Podcast. So don't go anywhere. Listen to us live on the stream here on octalkradio.net, or as I said, on Facebook or somewhere else if you're watching us, because this is just going to be one short word. When we come back, I wonder if you could share the inspiration that you
Sure.
had for writing this book. 300 pages of it, a big commitment, right? So you don't want to go anywhere, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Shawn Andrews and I will be back after this word from me. Podcast. I am your host, Richard Franzi. You know, all of our shows can be heard anytime on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher.com, Spreaker, several hundred former guest websites whose CEOs have been on our show. Since we started the show in 2009, we've reached hundreds of thousands of listeners through our live stream, podcasts, and other platforms. Simply type in Critical Mass Radio Show in your favorite software, podcasting software, to find our weekly shows with great guests like Dr. Shawn Andrews. We're talking about her book, The Power of Perception, the heavily researched and documented reality of the workplace. And I asked you before the break, I was going to ask you to tell us what was the inspiration for making the commitment to complete this book?
Yeah. So when I started my doctoral dissertation in 2010, I knew. I'll just take a step back. I knew I wanted to research women in leadership, but what led me to that is at the time the statistics around the leadership gender gap in our global society started to be published in the mainstream. And so I saw this data that showed the percentages of women in the workforce, the percentages of women getting bachelor's degrees, and then the actual percentages who sit on boards and are CEOs. And when you look at those stats, they're shocking.
Right.
Purely shocking.
Why?
Because,
in a sentence, what's missing?
well, what happens is women are in the workforce. So you can't say it's historical. You can't say they don't have education. You can't say women don't have experience. We're there. Women are there. But when you look at leadership, we're not there.
Right.
And why? I was really intrigued about what is behind, how can we go from 50 to 60% in numbers cross industries to 5% cross industries globally. Right. Why are so many women falling off?
It would seem like there's an external factor that's mitigating that, or something, because the population is there. It would be natural that it should keep representing about the same amount all the way through the levels of the pyramid, right?
You got it.
Okay.
That would be a natural assumption.
You would think that, right?
Yes, you would
Unless
think
there's
that.
some controlling factors. I'm using words that may not be research correct, but you know what I'm trying to say. Something beyond the reality of that situation is creating this problem.
Yes. And the reality is there are multiple barriers. Unfortunately, there's not one silver, one
One
we can
easy
just
thing, right.
tackle and that's it. We're all
Right,
good.
right.
Gender bias, check, done.
Done in 2018.
Yeah, done. Unfortunately, it's multifactorial. And some of the barriers are passed on from generation to generation and reinforced in society and in the media. And others we control ourselves. So some we can affect short term, some it's going to take longer to affect. But
is that why you wrote the book?
I really so I saw the stats. I was shocked. I was intrigued about what was behind it. But the reason I wanted to write the book is because I'm an educator by nature, teaching, training. And so I wanted to write it to bring awareness to all the issues, because there are tons of issues in here. As from leadership to gender differences to socialization to diversity to generations to emotional intelligence. There's tons of info. And so I wanted to pull it all together and put it in one place that's understandable and explain it. So I wanted to bring awareness. I wanted to educate, but I also wanted to inspire. I want to inspire men, I want to inspire women, and I want to inspire organizations to help them be more competitive, but also diverse and inclusive in the end, because we are becoming more diverse as a global society every day, and that's not going away.
Do you equate being diverse and inclusive with being more competitive? Does your research suggest those qualities equal that outcome?
They do.
Okay.
They do. And actually, that's actually not even my research. That's research of others, many others. And so I have one chapter called Diversify or Die is the name of the chapter. And in there is where I put all those statistics around diversity and inclusion. So on a whole host of factors, from people are more engaged to more innovation to more collaborative to
these are all good things.
Yeah, we work better as teams. We feel that our opinions are valued. Hey, that's a nice thing, right?
Sounds like nirvana.
It does. It does.
It can't possibly exist in business.
Right. So you have all these things, but you also have bottom line numbers.
Yes.
You have better return on equity, better return on investment. And so when you look at that, and I explain it all in the book, but when you look at all the stats, the data's there.
Wow.
And it keeps growing. So the data behind being more diverse and inclusive, and it's not, gender is a big part of it. And the reason so there's also, of course, race diversity, really different backgrounds, age, LGBT. There's many types of diversity.
Sure.
But gender is the best place to start with because it encompasses all those other types.
It does, doesn't it?
So that's why I focus on gender. But when I speak of diversity and inclusion, I'm referring to gender, but it also includes, race, ethnicity, age.
We're talking with Dr. Shawn Andrews. We're talking about her book, The Power of Perception. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you, this feels like this realization of the benefits of inclusion and diversity is being picked up by large multinational companies faster than smaller companies. I have no research for this, Shawn. It's just my sense, right, that PepsiCo and Coke and other large, big brands recognize the value of doing this and have initiatives for that. But it's something that my audience, which tends to be lower middle market companies across North America and around the world, you can learn from your big brothers and sisters, right? The value, and you should be able to affect your company quicker because you have less people. So a well-placed diversity strategy can make a bigger difference in a company of 100 than a company of 100,000.
Absolutely. And if you think of why the big companies are leading the charge, it's because they're under corporate pressure to do that. Their stakeholders are providing pressure. There's more pressure on boards to be more diverse and inclusive. And a lot of companies have taken heat for not being. And so big companies, and there's a number that have hopped on the bandwagon, and there's more every day. But I absolutely agree with you. I think smaller companies, smaller to mid-size, have a tremendous opportunity here because they can affect change quicker and easier.
We're running out of time, and I apologize for that. We have a few minutes left. Who did you write this book for? Who should go on? Well, you're going to tell us where to go to get it, but who should read your book?
So let me reference. So when you think of, I would say that the main audience, who would probably be most interested in this book would be career-minded women.
Okay.
Because it's in the same vein as the Confidence Code, Lean In, Sally Hegelson, Dr. Lois Frankel's. We can rent some books. So it's in the same vein of those books, which are about women, career-minded women. But I also wanted to balance that because men are critically important, and we can't affect any change. We won't even get close to gender parity without men on board.
Right.
And so I speak to men through in the leadership, the emotional intelligence, and the barriers. And then chapter 12 in particular, which is the conclusion, implications for men, women in the world. And I titled it that because that chapter is directed even more towards men and organizations and what we can do. So I wanted to put a lot of effort into providing some practical tools and strategies that can be actioned right away. And I find with that with CEOs, most of the time they're simply unaware of the issues.
Right.
And so I have several pages I've dedicated I've spoken directly to CEOs and then to organizations and their HR and leadership and what they can do to speak to the newer generations and to help make our organizations more flexible, more diverse, and more inclusive.
Because I agree with you that so many times it's what they don't know, but once they learn it, then they want to take action. So having tools and guidebook and assistance to taking action increases the likelihood they're going to actually make something happen with what they've just learned.
Yeah.
Make it easy for them to take it back and try to implement it within their organizations, right?
Right.
Okay.
And I didn't want to stop at just a career for women book.
Right.
Because that's not enough.
Right.
And so
because your title is Perception, The Power of Perception. Perception is reality. You're only dealing with half the population if you just exclude men.
That's right. Right. And so we have to have everyone working in tandem, in sync together to dialogue and take action.
So do you think someday you'll write a book about how perception has changed, or do you think within our lifetime, Dr. Andrews, that the tide will have changed enough that your research will suggest that equal population will have moved up the ranks of the corporate world?
I hesitate to say we will get to a true gender equality. True 50. What I mean by that is 50-50.
Yeah, represented by the
50-50.
Percentage of the population.
And the reason I say that is because in the research I did and the women I interviewed, oftentimes women will get to a certain level, let's say director or VP, and they'll look at the top and say, I don't want the politics.
Right.
I value my free time more. I don't want to be caught up in that. And so women often want different things than men. Not all. There's many women who want success and leadership just like men do. But there are some women who want other things. And for those reasons, I don't think we will ever get to true 50-50 parity, but we can get a lot closer than 5%, which is what we have now.
That's shocking, right? 5%.
5%.
There's really no good reason other than the power of perception and bias and the reality of how we view things, right? So you're helping us to reframe a bit of that, and I appreciate it. If someone would like to buy your book, how would they get your book?
Well, it's available everywhere. It's available on Amazon, other online sites, and also in bookstores.
Okay.
So it actually officially launched March 6th, so it is out there, available.
Doesn't that feel good?
It does. It does. I'm actually very excited because I'm doing my first book signing this Saturday.
Where?
At Barnes & Noble in the Tustin Marketplace on Jamboree.
Oh, there you go. So if you're in Orange County or Southern California, where is that again?
It's on Jamboree, and it's Tustin Marketplace on Jamboree, and it'll be from 1 to 5. I'll be there.
Wow.
Signing books, and it's actually in conjunction with Girls Inc. It's a fundraiser for them.
Okay.
So a percentage of all the proceeds will benefit Girls Inc. as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. That's awesome. Hopefully, if you're listening to the live stream or you picked up the podcast this week, and you can go out and participate. And Girls Inc. is a great organization. So thank you for being a friend of the program. I appreciate the support. Welcome to the Critical Mass community.
Thank you, Rick.
It's been great having you on the show.
Thank you.
Very proud of what you've done here. This is awesome work, and I want to thank the people who introduced us, right? Hopefully they're out there listening either to the live stream or they're going to listen to the podcast. But that's all we have time for, so I got to thank our engineer, Paul Roberts, our producers, without whom we wouldn't have a show, Joan Park, Crystal Nunley, and Haley Stern. If you want to connect with me on social media, I'd say start with LinkedIn. We'll go from there. Let's start the conversation on LinkedIn. I'm Richard Franzi, Franzi. And until the next show, I hope all of your business decisions will move your company in a positive direction.